Torotcoi is a Roma rights expert for the European Roma Grassroots Organization Network. She's also a United Nations advocacy specialist, Global Forum of Communities on Discriminated on Work and Descent, and a founding member of Young Roma Maramuurs Association in Romania, a youth organization focused on the development of Roma communities. Simona, you are a Roma woman who lives in the global north. However, the discussion around climate justice often centers on people who live in the global south or in the global majority. So how are those discussions relevant to you and the work that you do? And also as a representative of communities discriminated on work and descent, if you could talk a little bit to us, the connections you see in the race, gender, and climate space between these very geographically different and diverse groups.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Thank you for having me. Indeed, the climate justice discourse is very relevant for the Roma, especially when we speak about it from an environmental racist perspective. But also, as you have mentioned, together with other communities, Roma are facing a similar type of discrimination based on work and descent. So we are about 270 million of this type of groups across the world. And I just want to name them because I think that's very important. So Roma in Europe, but Dalits in South Asia, we have Haratins in Sahel, and other similar groups in Africa, but also Quilombola and Palenque in Brazil and Colombia. So we are a global network of communities discriminated on work and descent. And usually our discrimination, it's very much related to this notion of purity and pollution. So we have been excluded from basic public services, we are isolated, excluded, segregated in many cases. But before I share a bit about the similarities with other groups, I just want to focus a bit on the Roma case because this is where I come from. So indeed, you know, Roma are like the largest group in Europe in terms of discrimination and exclusion. But many times we see that the human rights violations that we face have not been addressed or are not properly addressed by existing institutions, national human rights institutions, and we are becoming more and more susceptible in the face of climate change. As I said, many Roma are pushed to live in informal, substandard settlements. Many times these are settlements that don't have any sort of infrastructure, access to water, to electricity, to sewage, and many times these are waste dumps. Many of the Roma people there, including women, are collecting waste, plastic, metal, all sorts of scrap, and this severely affects their health, including all sorts of illnesses associated with pulmonary disease and many as such. And also because of the poor infrastructure of the housing, either in the summer or in the winter, you know, Roma are much more exposed to heat waves or to floods, especially now in Central Eastern Europe. We experienced severe floods, but most of the Roma populations were kind of pushed away when it comes to aid or all sorts of support from the state. So we see that even though this type of discrimination, it's happening, exists. We as activists, as leaders, we are trying to advocate, to raise concerns about this, but many times we are left out even from this type of discourse. Now, when it comes to the other regions, I think, of course, there are so many similarities, especially with the Quilombola people in Latin America, because, you know, they have been severely, strongly related to the land in which they live. And many of the Quilombola women, of course, are involved into farming and fisheries and this type of jobs. And they are very severely vulnerable to the climate change. As I said, raising temperatures, rainfall patterns, but also extreme weather events have been affecting their activity. And also what we see in Brazil and other such countries is that we have these mega infrastructure projects, also here, in which the Quilombola communities are being removed from their land. So they are pushed away from this, and we see that women are the ones that are, you know, trying to fight and resist this type of changes. I also want to mention a bit about the Haratin women in Sahel and Mauritania. Because of the desertification, are pushing to migration. So these Haratin women are experiencing pre-colonial forms of slavery. So they don't own land many times. They're pushing to migration. They don't own land many times. So we see there are similarities across different groups, but more specifically with the Dalit women. I think that's the key kind of pattern that we see, especially when we compare Roma and Dalit women. Again, we see that they're kind of left out of all sorts of policies, even though there are some important frameworks addressing climate justice, but again, we are left out of these mainstream ones. Thank you.